I'm Peter Levine, the director of the Defense Management Institute, and we're here today as a part of a planned series of interviews with individuals who have made a significant contribution to improving the management of the Department of Defense. Today, we're speaking with Terry Gerton, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the National Academy of Public Administration. NAPA is a congressionally chartered nonprofit organization that brings together the country's leading experts in public management in an effort to improve governance at the federal, state, and local levels. Before joining NAPA, Ms. Gerton completed a 20-year career in the Army and spent 12 years in the senior executive service, much of it at the Department of Defense.
Peter, I'm so delighted to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Tell me about what you learned about management in those kinds of positions. What kinds of management challenges did you face, and what kind of lessons did you learn? Is there anything you'd like to share?
Well, I think there's both leadership challenges and management challenges, right? So again, as a maintenance company commander in Germany, when it was still East Germany and West Germany, and we all had, you know, war fighting assignments and missions, I had 320 people in my company at the ripe old age of 25, from one border of West Germany to the other. And thinking about how to keep all of those folks accountable, to keep accountability of all your supplies and equipment, to engage with a brigade that was distributed across that space as well, and to make all of those rounds with a Jeep and a wired phone, because that was the technology of the time. Just learning how to keep everybody on task and on mission, and the importance of reporting accurately, right? There wasn't any room for fudging any of those numbers, right? You had to be accurate and precise. But managerially, the idea of running a maintenance shop, right? Keeping accountability for the equipment, optimizing maintenance, repair, and training cycles, understanding your supply rotations, and keeping track of parts that are on order, parts that are on hand. Just incredible kind of life lessons for so many things.
You mentioned earlier that you had the advantage of being able to communicate both with the military and with the civilians. DoD really has a unique organizational structure with both the military structure and the civilian structure side by side and overlapping at different points. And I wonder whether you have any insight into how well that works, not your personal relationships across those lines, but the civilian-military relationship across the Department of Defense. Does it add functionality? Are there friction points that are problematic for the department?
That's a really great question. I think, you have to start from the core belief in civilian control of the military, right? That's how we're structured, and that's how we have to organize. But there is tension, and there's challenges in communicating across those two communities. Certainly, I felt very fortunate. I always worked for terrific military folks who were very open to what I had to say and what their civilian counterparts had to say. But I think it can be very difficult for the civilians to understand the command and control structure on the military and the kind of pressures that military leaders feel responsible for and that they have to work within. And at the same time, the military, who often don't have much exposure to civilians at all until they get to the Pentagon, right? Don't understand that construct and that development channel. So they tend to, without intervention, I think, to view the opposite community with some suspicion and some mistrust. But where the two are open to conversation, I think it can be a really powerful partnership. I mean, I think what I learned the most was the idea from my civilian perspective that I was best off if I was totally transparent with my military counterpart to say, this is what I think and why I think and what I think the pros and cons are to pursuing a particular course of action. Only once did I ever have to offer that they could fire me, which I did. But that was key to a breakthrough as well. And to invite the military counterpart to tell you what their key priorities and concerns are. And at that point, the two sides can really bring their best assets to solve the problem. If they're trying to fight or defend against the other, the balance doesn't work.
One of the challenges you had as an SES, I presume, was working across organizations, that you had to not only manage the people who worked for you, but you had to work with other organizations. The department is notoriously structured in pillars that don't necessarily work well together. Can you talk about the challenges of working within that kind of structure?
I would call it the need for bureaucratic ninja-ness, right? You just, if you've been there long enough and you kind of know how the bureaucracy operates, again, you can use it to your advantage or your disadvantage. But as an example, when I was in my first SES position in what's now CAPE, I was in charge of the DoD programming process, right? That was my job, the FIT database and all of its glory, and how DoD kind of goes through its 5-year programming cycle. And one of the great frustrations, and I know you could appreciate this from your time on the Hill, is that DoD's programming and budgeting and execution data doesn't link together, right? So you can program all you want and it's fabulous, but if you want to know how that program actually played out in execution, nobody knows. So I had a really great relationship with my partner in the budget side, who maintained the budget database, and we thought we could figure out how to map the two databases so that we could answer that question, because execution data is in the budget data. And so rather than create new elements, we just created this map. Well, we briefed it to the comptroller, we briefed it to the PA&E, and they said, well, you have to get the services and the defense agencies to agree. So 3 years later, I remember I was in my final briefing. Around the table, I had all of the service programmers, all of the service budgeters, the defense agencies were there, and the Navy G8 announced that he was leaving. Every single chair pushed back, and that was the end of the conversation. We lost one person just prior to being able to do the final briefing and get consensus, and we lost the entire negotiation. Back to your rotation schedules, right? So it can be incredibly difficult and time-consuming. And no matter how many PPBE commissions you have, no matter how many frustrating briefings on the DoD budget process, it's people and it's complex, and there's nothing necessarily that motivates change. So to my knowledge, they still can't map programming and budgeting.
Any other management challenges you'd like to talk about while you're in the department as an SES before I move on?
Well,
other ones yet?
I certainly think, well, I don't know if you'd classify it as management or leadership, but realigning several institutions and agencies within AMC as a result of 2005 BRAC was a real leadership and management challenge. AMC had the largest number of employees of any command affected by BRAC, and we had to consolidate several of our commands into single institutions, and we had to move the headquarters from Fort Belvoir to Huntsville. So we had almost 11,000 employees that were going to have to move. At the end of the day, one measure of effectiveness is we had the highest continuation rate of people who did make moves under BRAC of any of the BRAC-affected organizations. But we were building new headquarters. I still to this day remember trying to imagine what a command center should look like, right? How we should equip a command center in 2010 so that it could still be relevant and meaningful in 2025. Right? Those kinds of questions, the integration across so many PERT diagrams that you had to have like giant conference tables to lay them all out. And so you had this organizational management challenge, but then you had individual people who were making individual decisions. Do I stay? Do I go? Who's going to buy my house? Where are my kids going to go to school? What's going to happen to my commute? Trying to deal with both extremes of that spectrum and make it functional from a mission perspective as well as responsive to individual concerns was an incredible lesson.